Hello, fandom. This is DJ Sully D, and this is the Fandom Realm. Today, I'm going to talk a little about the upcoming series Star Trek Picard. I just want to put some of my thoughts out there about what came before for Picard and sort of what I would like to see coming out of Star Trek Picard. Before I move on, though, I just want to mention that I'm going into this series without having seen any spoilers about what is going to happen. The only thing I've seen have been the first two main trailers. So I want to sort of make sure everybody understands that I'm not keeping up with all this information that they might be up on. So please don't judge if I'm not talking about information that's out there or theories that are out there, because I have not been keeping up with that for a reason. I really don't want to be spoiled by this series. I wanted some general information of what was going to happen and get sort of a general story, which I think was really portrayed well in the first two main trailers. So I haven't really watched anything else, any of the TV spots. I haven't watched any YouTube videos on Star Trek Picard. So please keep that in mind while you're listening to what I have to say. I've seen several people asking also about if there are any Star Trek episodes that they should watch to get ready for Picard. So at the end of this podcast, I'll just throw out a few ideas that I had that might get you ready to watch Picard, especially if you are someone who is not familiar with the entire Star Trek franchise. If you haven't seen any of the trailers, if you've actually seen less than I have, there could be some potential spoilers here for Star Trek Picard. There could also be some spoilers for some of the series and movies that I'll talk about in this discussion as well. So please keep that in mind. So to go ahead and get started, I'm just going to sort of start by saying that I have huge hopes for this series. I've really enjoyed Star Trek Discovery. I know that a lot of people don't like it, and it has Michelle Yeoh, so that's always a positive. But it has left me wanting. You know, I grew up with Star Trek The Next Generation, then Deep Space Nine, then Voyager, and Enterprise. To me, Enterprise was sort of the outcast there, but then Discovery was announced. I got really excited, but I don't think Discovery has really brought me to the point of feeling the same way about Star Trek that I did with The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager. And I think part of that has to do with the thought of exploration and the human condition, and basically the statement of boldly going where no man has gone before. That entire feeling doesn't really catch on with me when watching Discovery for some reason. And it's sort of odd because of the way their storyline is set up, and there are so many fantastical science fiction type elements to it with time travel and all of that. You would think that would hit me more for Discovery than it would have for Enterprise or Voyager or DS9 or The Next Generation. But it really hasn't. And so I've really been looking forward to getting Picard when it was first announced. I've been overjoyed in hopes that, we're going to get a Star Trek series that sort of awakens that inner Star Trek, boldly go where no one has gone before type idea in me. Alright, so let's talk first about where Picard has been and where Star Trek has been so far. Sort of look at where things were left off, give them an idea of where things are last we knew what happened. Okay, and so first thing we probably should look at is Star Trek The Next Generation. And if we look at that series and the Star Trek The Next Generation movies, I think that's a good place to start. Of course, a lot of people thought the movies were very substandard to what the actual Next Generation series was. I mostly agree with that. The only one that I really liked was Star Trek First Contact. It's actually one of my favorite overall Star Trek movies. The our crew of the Enterprise is going to have to save Earth once again from the Borg. I really enjoyed that entire movie and how they weaved the whole story together, and sort of how they took us back in time and showed us how Earth went to the stars and all of that. And that was big for me because I had always sort of wondered that. And I sort of liked how they weaved all that together. So Star Trek First Contact was extremely important for me. Of course, there's also going to be Star Trek Insurrection, which I think isn't as bad as most people rank it as. And then, of course, the final movie for the Next Generation cast was Star Trek Nemesis. It was so terribly disappointing to me, and I think most Star Trek fans. I know at that point in time, I was really disappointed in where Star Trek had gone, although they sort of had something of an original idea, one of the more unique types of things to do. I didn't think they pulled it off real well, and that's going to really hurt. And then, of course, the movie, everything up throughout the movie was sort of a big reach to most fans. And then they did the unthinkable and killed off Data, who sacrificed himself basically to save his friends. I think that shocked the fandom. I think that really drove fans to sort of turn on Star Trek, especially at that point in time when Nemesis came out. So I think that's something that, they're going to try to come back from in Star Trek Picard. The other thing is, I think Nemesis is an important part of the entire Picard timeline. If they're talking about the Romulans in Picard, then I don't see how they can not mention the events that happened in Nemesis. Also, it looks like, from what we've seen in the first two trailers, there is basically a destroyed Data. So it looks like we're picking up quite a few years after the events of Nemesis. So that's something that I think is important for everybody to realize, sort of where we are picking up. And I do just want to mention sort of the ending of Star Trek Nemesis, because I think that is something that you probably need to know as Picard starts. As most of you will remember, if you've seen Nemesis at the end, basically Riker has been promoted to captain of the Titan and goes on his own way. We're left with Picard explaining to B4, who was Data's twin brother, basically about his death. And then Picard heads to the bridge and seems to be happy. We leave the Enterprise basically fixed from battle. So as we look at the timeline for Star Trek Picard, it's going to happen about 15 years after the events of Nemesis. So there's a lot of room for growth within that time period. We have seen several of the former crew in the trailers. We don't know what their status is. We know Riker and Troy have a child. We don't know what Riker's status is. 15 years. Would he have possibly retired from Starfleet by that point? Is he just on leave or something like that? I'll be interested to see how all that turns out. Then you have the questions of, where is Geordi? Where is Worf? And probably the person I'm most interested to see if they do something with is, well, first of all, Worf. I know there's a lot of people out there that have been calling for a Captain Worf movie or TV series or something like that, which that would be sort of cool. So you never know who replaced Jean-Luc Picard as captain of the Enterprise. Because 15 years later, they've got to have a new captain of the Enterprise if he's in retirement. So I'm very excited to see all of that. Now, from what I've seen in the trailers, it looks like the Romulans are going to play a big role in this series as well, and they're going to be very heavily involved. I'm not really a big fan of the Romulans. I always wanted them to be sort of more involved in the Next Generation series. They were much more involved, I think, in Deep Space Nine. But one of the big things I'm looking forward to seeing, and I'm not sure if they're going to do, is showing the supernova that basically killed or destroyed Romulus. That to me is going to be very important. It's going to give them an opportunity, I think, to introduce and sort of splinter the canon. If we see that in the actual Prime canon universe, and then we have the Kelvin universe of Chris Pine and Carl Urban and the Star Trek movies of 2009, which I love those movies. I'm just not sure they have anything to do with what we're looking at with Star Trek Picard. Although I'm hoping they're going to take the opportunity to basically show that event happening so that it'll make a little more sense in canon. It also looks like the Borg are going to be playing a major role. I'll be interested to see how that goes. We are seeing, and this is not a huge spoiler, it's in the actual trailers for the most part, we're going to be seeing Hugh from one of the Next Generation episodes. I think it was Borg. We're going to be seeing him, so we'll see what's going on. The storyline way back then I thought it was one of the more controversial storylines that Star Trek The Next Generation did. And so I know there are some people who don't want the Borg involved in any way. I like the Borg. I think they are basically a menace to everybody. They are very OP, I think, and because of that, I tend to think they make a good enemy for Picard and the Next Generation crew. Now, I do understand people want new enemies, things like that. Completely understand that. I'm sort of hoping maybe the Romulans will serve. I'm sort of hoping the Romulans will fill that role for us in Star Trek Picard. Notice I'm not really talking a whole lot about Discovery, and although it's on the same Prime timeline, I don't think we're really going to see anything about it. I think the producers are going to try to separate those two as much as possible, because they're really wanting, I think, fans to really fall in love with Star Trek Picard, and they know that there's a lot of division among fandom with Star Trek Discovery. So when we look at Star Trek Picard, what am I hoping for? The biggest thing I want to see is I want to see a show that's mostly liked throughout the fandom, that people are going to go and they're going to watch and they're going to enjoy. I would love for it to be something like Mandalorian ended up being for Star Wars fans, but the bad thing is it seems like the haters are already out there doing everything they can to bash this series before they've even seen an episode of it. Some of it's attributed to Patrick Stewart and some of the things he has said. I don't have a problem with it, but, it seems like we once again, we have our social justice warriors on one side and the fandom menace on the other side. And yeah, I'm going to use that name for those who are going to be haters of the Star Trek series. You seem to have them lining up on both sides. So moving on from talking about that whole idea of what I want out of the series, a few things that I'm seeing in the series, in the trailers. We've seen Data in the trailers, but I'm actually wondering whether we're actually seeing Data. Could be seen B4, sort of dressed up as Data. Maybe why there's some differences in sort of the look B4 and Data. I also think, are they going to preserve what happened in Star Trek Nemesis? Are they going to preserve the fact that their Data is dead? Data sacrificed himself. Or are they going to try to retcon some of that and somehow try to bring him back? I'll be interested to see what's going on there. I've already mentioned hoping to get to see more of Riker and the Next Generation cast. I'm sort of afraid they're going to keep that to a minimum for the most part. I'm afraid basically what we've seen of the Next Generation cast, maybe about all we see of them, is what has been in the trailers. I hope they are building a good cast. I look at the people they've cast as basically the new crew that'll be going out with Captain Picard, and I'm not very familiar with most of them. That's good in some ways because I have no preconceived notions. That's one of the reasons I've liked Star Trek Discovery quite a bit. Basically, Michelle Yeoh is the only person on that show that I really know and love, and sort of all the other characters had to grow and they had to build them for me. And, I enjoy most of those characters. So hopefully they can develop these characters even better, and that's just something we'll have to see what happens. I'm mixed, but mostly excited about seeing Jeri Ryan joining the cast. Of course, she's coming in from Star Trek Voyager. This is another one of the things that sort of makes me think we're going to be talking about the Borg in this some. I don't think there would be any reason to have her reprising 7 of 9 unless the Borg are going to play a part in the storyline. I'm not someone who's against having the old cast in for some fan service, but I hope they're able to balance that with also introducing the new cast. Again, like I've said before, I'll be interested to see where Riker is. One thing I did see was Gates McFadden playing Dr. Crusher. I think it looks like she's going to make a return as well, so I'm very interested to see what happens there. Now, one thing that I did just learn recently was Will Wheaton, who played Wesley. A lot of people hated him. I always sort of liked Wesley. He had a rocky relationship with Star Trek fans, especially after he left the show, and so that's sort of been repaired a little bit over the last few years, I think. I've already mentioned a little bit. We're going to see the Q return. It looks like the Romulans are having something to do with a Borg cube. What are the Romulans doing? Appropriating the Borg technology, how they get a hold of it. Does that have anything to do with Hugh? A lot of big questions there. So one of the other questions that I've been seeing people posting regarding Star Trek Picard is the question, if I'm not a Star Trek fan, but I'm wanting to watch Star Trek Picard, what are some episodes or movies that would be recommended to get us up to date going into Star Trek Picard so we will sort of know what's going on? Well, I've got two sort of ideas on that. The first one is, if you've never watched a Star Trek before, I would say just go in, watch the series, and see what happens. Now, if you are someone who would like to be more interested in Star Trek and sort of get a bigger idea, first thing I'm going to basically tell you to do to get ready for Picard, which I think would be important, is I think there are a couple of Star Trek The Next Generation episodes to watch. The first one is The Best of Both Worlds. That's where the Next Generation crew are going to battle the Borg the first time the Borg tried to attack Earth. And that is a two-parter, by the way, so make sure you watch both parts. I would also catch iBorg, which introduced us to Hugh. To me, this is a must-see episode. This is probably one of my top 3 or 4 episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation all time. Moving on with Star Trek The Next Generation, I think it would be maybe beneficial, sort of get the mood of Star Trek, to go ahead and watch the final episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, which was called All Good Things. Basically, it ends the Next Generation series, and basically the first episode was Picard having to defend humanity, and the last episode was Picard having to defend humanity. Moving on, I also think you need to catch Star Trek First Contact. For some reason, especially since it is the Borg, I'm thinking it would probably be important to take a look at that. I know a lot of people get upset with that movie. And then, of course, after you watch First Contact, I think Star Trek Nemesis, although you're not going to enjoy it probably very much, would probably be another must-see to get ready if you're in the group that want to see some of these episodes leading up to this. Okay, fandom, that's my quick rundown of a few things to get you ready for Star Trek Picard. Again, a few things that are sort of my ideas and me sort of musing out there a little bit. Again, if you've seen more info, if you love spoilers and you're online and all of that, you haven't seen more than those first couple of trailers, don't kill me on all this, please. I have not seen all those ads, all those trailers, anything basically online. I've basically sort of sequestered myself from all that to try to know as little as possible. So I would love to see your comments below on Star Trek Picard and what's going to happen. But please leave your non-spoiler ideas in the comment section below. And when I talk about non-spoiler, anything that's in the first couple trailers, you're fine to talk about. That would be awesome. Please like this video and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Please hit that subscribe button. I would really like to be able to get info out to you a whole lot easier, and it's just easier to do if you subscribe. And then please share this with friends. If you find it helpful or you have any Star Trek friends, please share this podcast with them. Now, that's it for now. We'll see you next time when we're actually going to review episode 1 of Star Trek Picard. See you then. Goodbye.